Okay, thank you. Robert J. Grant is the author of 5 books based on the Edgar Cayce readings, including The Place We Call Home, Exploring the Soul's Existence After Death, Universe of Worlds, Exploring the Frontiers of the Afterlife, Edgar Cayce on Angels and Archangels, and the Magdalene Diaries. He was part of the 5-member team who spent 5 years computerizing the entirety of the 14,300 and plus readings given by Edgar Cayce between 1986 and 1991. As a result of that massive undertaking, Robert has emerged as a leading authority and popular speaker on a vast number of topics in the Edgar Cayce readings. He has spent more than 25 years studying the Edgar Cayce readings on the subject of death, dying, and afterlife. He is featured in the award-winning documentary film, Edgar Cayce, The Beautiful Dreamer, now on DVD. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a very warm welcome to Robert Grant.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi. My name's Rob. I'm from all time and space. No, just kidding. I was thinking of the kids saying where they were from. I remember going to the Baghdad Theater the week What the Bleep Do We Know opened, and I went with a friend of mine who's a physics professor at University of Oregon, somewhere in Oregon, and she said there's this little film that's pretty amazing, and I remember the director was there and a couple of the producers, and they were lamenting over the fact that they were not able to get distribution for the film. And I remember seeing this and I was thinking, this film, and how many of you have seen What the Bleep? Yeah, right. There was a reading, during the time I was computerizing the readings, I remember Cayce saying, science will lead mankind to God much quicker than religion because God is a scientifically provable fact. And at the time, of course, people were like, what? And he said, the unseen force, he said, that ye call God manifests in electricity, and he went on into a lot of different things. And I'm sitting in the theater watching this film, and I'm going, talk about fulfilled prophecy. And also what got me was the opening of the film, and maybe it's because I was in broadcast journalism for such a long time. You remember the old newsreels that they used to show at films? What I loved was the opening where the guy says, Darwin pounded the table. The creator is nothing, nowhere. We are random mutations, simply a carrier of DNAs in our relentless quest for more in a meaningless universe. Meanwhile, science and religion were hitting the wall. If science was mechanistic and God was the holy creator, then what were we humans supposed to do? Science dug ever deeper into a dead universe and stumbled upon a mystery and unlocked a mystery. In tiny corners of space and time, scientists found endless energy and mind-numbing mysteries, mysteries that suggest we're all connected, that the physical universe is essentially non-physical. Time and space are simply constructs of this non-materialness. Today, renegade scientists are meeting with religious leaders. Conferences pushing forward a meeting of science and spirit are springing up everywhere. As the 20th century blew open doors of a mechanistic view, will the 21st century blow down the iron wall between church and laboratory? We'll see. This is your Is Newsreel reporter signing off. We'll be back with sports right after this. But it was such thank you. It was such a great, groundbreaking film because, number one, in it, you had physicists, and then there was J.Z. Knight, which was kind of slipped in there. And I thought, when I saw her, or I saw Ramtha, I thought she was another physicist, like the rest of them. And then I saw the credits roll, and I'm going, Ramtha? That was Ramtha? And I thought, that truly the connection between science and spirituality, that movie did indeed blow open doors. And the word quantum, wasn't familiar with people at the time that Edgar Cayce lived and gave readings, but he really seemed to be predicting a time, that when quantum physics, what he called science, would bring people to a greater spiritual awareness. And he talked about the constructs of time and space, that they're illusions, but they're necessary illusions for our understanding in a three-dimensional construct. Well, I was driving a friend of mine to the airport. Her name was Amy, and she worked here. And when I picked her up, she said, well, I got to go home and grab my bags and pack a few extra things. And then she looked at her itinerary and freaked out totally. She goes, I thought my flight was at 4:30. It leaves at 3:20. It was 2:05. And we had to drive to Pungo. I don't know how many of you know where Pungo is. We had to go to Pungo, which is about 30 miles from here. She had to grab her things, and we had to get to the airport, which was another 30 miles. And you know how you get those insights when you're driving? Usually driving or in the shower, that's when your conscious mind is kind of on automatic pilot and the divine drops things through. I don't know where this came from, but all at once I remembered Cayce talking about that time is malleable. And so I said, Amy, we have plenty of time. And she's in this anxiety thing. She goes, no, we're not. I'm not going to make it. And she was flying from here to go overseas to Egypt. And I said, and I'm driving. I said, Amy, look at me. We have plenty of time. I need you to completely believe this, or we won't make it to the airport. She goes, what are you talking about? I said, suspend all belief that we're late, that we don't have enough time. I said, and put your watch in your pocket right now. And she goes, you're nuts, aren't you? I said, yes, but that's beside the point. And I said, just follow this. So as we're driving along, like a mantra, I kept saying, we have more than enough time. More than enough time. We have plenty of time. I said, we'll make it. And absolutely no anxiety. And anytime, I said, anytime you start thinking about time and being late, say to yourself or say it aloud, we have plenty of time. And, at one point we were saying it together, and we were at a stoplight, and the windows were rolled down, and the people next to us probably thought we were nuts because we're both going, we have plenty of time. We have more than enough time. I didn't know what I was doing, other than it was very important to completely believe that we were outside the realm of time. And so she went home, and of course she quickly packed, and she was like doing it in a song at this point. I have more than enough time. She's singing this, coming downstairs, throws her bag in the car, and we're on our way to the airport, which was another 30 miles, of course. And she said, and all at once she said, we do have more than enough time, don't we? I said, all the time in the world. Kept repeating this, and I pull up to the curb, help her out with her bag, and all the while I was remembering Cayce saying, what you focus on, whatever intent you hold for any length of time, will bring something into manifestation. Because in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, it said that our attention span is about 6 to 10 seconds every minute. It changes into another direction. And so when we checked her bag, I said, now look at your watch. It was 2:55. It was 2:55. We had left here at 5 after 2. There is absolutely no way possible that this could have happened. And she looked at me like, what did you do? I said, I didn't do a thing. I said, I didn't do a thing, except I completely believed that this was possible. And she had just had the strangest look on her face. I said, you better go to your gate or you'll be late. And but this idea, that they put forth, that science has put forth, that our thoughts bring into being things or manifestation. This is like quantum thinking. Like if you can totally wrap your mind around something and completely believe it. You know, this is at the heart of the film The Secret. There's a book that Claude Bristol wrote in 1948 called The Magic of Believing. You know, it's the same idea that we create our own reality, and this really is, to me, the new science. But I would be lying if I said I was absolutely astonished when I found that it was 5 minutes till 3 when we pulled up, because again, we drove 60 miles and she packed and we were in traffic. And so, but I think because I was immersed in this material for so long, one of the first books I read was the Seth material. Any of you familiar with Seth? Seth Speaks. And some people found it extremely complex. And yet, when I went back and reread it, it's like this material was given in like 1970, 1971, and he's talking about the very same things they were talking about in What the Bleep Do We Know? And I wanted to share with you a couple of things that I found in the Seth material that talked about what we focus on or what we think about, you know, creates the reality that we know. He said the peculiar particular aspects of your physical world are dependent upon your focus within it. The physical universe does not contain physical objects of solidity, width, or depth, for example, to those whose existence is not within it. Other kinds of consciousness coexist within the same space that your world inhabits. And this goes back to, there was a book that came out, I don't think it's in print anymore, but they used to be called the Betty books. This woman, Betty, would go into a trance, and she would channel a group of higher beings called the Invisibles. And she passed on, Betty did, and later on, her husband went to a medium and picked up where they left off, and Betty came through. And when a friend was in the room, Betty asked the woman, "Where do you think I went when I passed on?" She goes, "I don't know, I think of you out in space somewhere." She goes, "I'm right here." She said, she said, if you think of all of the worlds and the universes in concentric circles, she said, when you look out into the heavens, you see empty space. And she said, it won't be long before science will be able to prove that there's no empty space, that it's filled with vibrations. And she said, and there are realms that are operating at a faster frequency than you can perceive. So when you look out, you see empty space. And I remembered the analogy that Hugh Lin gave, that the soul, which operates at a faster, higher vibration, can be likened to an airplane propeller. Like when it's stationary, you can see it. But when it's revved up full speed, you can see right through it. And the only change that happens is the vibration or the speed. And so, you know, interpenetrating this dimension are what Cayce called a universe of worlds. When someone asked him, is there life on other planets? Or is there life in other systems? Cayce said, the Earth is only an atom in the universe of worlds. I looked at that sentence and thought, now there's an answer for you. The Earth, think about that. The Earth is an atom in the universe of worlds. So it's like there's nothing out there per se. There's nothing. It's all within us. And so Seth said, there are 4 absolute coordinate points that intersect all realities. These coordinate points also act as channels through which energy flows and as warps or invisible paths from one reality to another. They also act as transformers and provide much of the generating energy that makes creation continuous in your terms. And he went on to talk about when you get those inspirations to do something or to not do something, you get those insights or whatnot. You might picture, you know, someone off stage that's prompting you, and it usually comes through the still small voice within. Cayce would say this is the connecting link between us and the unseen. And the divine doesn't seem to mind when we discover something and we take credit for it. You know, it's like something will come to mind and we'll follow it, and it opens doors that leads to something. It's like, wow, what a coincidence. You know, and it always gets me when people are skeptical of this stuff and they go, oh, it's just coincidence. It's like, it's coincidence, but there's no just to it. Seems to be this divine flow to things. And when Cayce talked about the Aquarian age and what the implications of this would mean, he talked about the oneness of science and spirituality, but he also talked about this awakening. And you know, I mentioned this at the last conference, but you know, there's all this talk about 2012. How many of you have heard about 2012 being the pivotal year, right? And it's like, to me, it reminds me of what was going on when they talked about 1998. Remember all the hoopla people? And I was, you know, at that time I was thinking, you know, for some reason or another, I don't think 2 gallons of water in the basement's going to do it. I think the earth changes are going to be within, are going to be with society. I don't think it has to do with the rising and falling of land masses. I think it has to do with a change in consciousness. And so, I don't know, I do a lot of inspirational writing. It's where after meditation you just take pen in hand and just allow yourself to write. This is something Cayce said anybody can learn to do. Well, I found myself writing this scenario that to me was very vivid. And for those of you who have heard the story, bear with me. For those of you who have not, picture a scene in your mind of a busy New York street, you know, rush hour, people passing each other, you know, strangers, and then everything starts to slow down. Just people's movements start getting a little bit slower. It's just, there's no crashing of cars, there's no blaring horns or anything. There's just this moment where you look into the eyes of the stranger walking toward you, and you see several things. You see yourself looking back at you. You see infinity or God, and you feel love like you have never known before, shining through the eyes of this perfect stranger right before you, and you realize you are them. Now imagine what that would feel like if that you just look and you see yourself, you know that you're loved, and you know that you're connected with everything and everyone around you. What shift would happen when that occurred? And picture that on that one street, that effect rippling out all across the world, in every neighborhood, in every city, and on every battlefield. Picture 2 guys that are at war, either in, you know, an American and at war in Iraq, and suddenly, you know, the one's getting ready to kill the other one, and he looks into his eyes and sees himself looking back at him, and he sees God. If they speak the same language, I can hear the other one go, "Oh my God, you're me." And the other one says, "And you're me, but more, you're God." And I can feel it. And they look down at the gun or the knife or whatever weapon they're holding, and they don't know what it's for. And they would never dream of hurting the other person because it's them, and they can see that it's them. We still retain our personality and our individuality, but we can feel, when we look into the eyes of someone else, we can feel that connection. What has been removed is the illusion of separation, because that's really the mother of all conflicts, isn't it? It's the us and them. So just imagine seeing this happening where there's a war going on, and what would happen if this event, if this expansive consciousness happened? Wars would end. Everybody, you wouldn't dream of hurting anyone because they're you. You're connected with everything. I can see a very bewildered CNN reporter that night on the news going, trying to keep the smile from his face because he's experienced this God moment, and he says, and in breaking news, all wars ended today. Those on both sides of the war, soldiers, commanders, everyone alike, saw themselves in each other and saw God. we'll be back with sports right after this. Don't go away. And that is kind of what I see as a critical mass awakening. The disappearance of this illusion that we're separate. And so I don't know where it came from, but when I read Ken Carey's book, The Vision, I don't know how many of you have heard of that book, The Vision, but that's what he talked about the year 2012 in that book as a period of a critical mass awakening. And maybe it's because of my theatrical background that I thought, what better way for an awakening to happen? Because our thoughts directly impact our reality. And this is what the belief we know was talking all about, that our thoughts, our feelings, and our focused intent changes not only ourselves, but the world. And I remember there was a reading that Edgar Cayce gave, and someone said Edgar Cayce was going through a lot of financial difficulties, and there were typical human problems like all of us have. And someone asked, why is the work not succeeding? And the answer was, it has succeeded beyond your wildest imagination. It is succeeding. And the person asked the question, then what's the problem? He said, there is no problem outside of you, outside of yourself. You're measuring success in financial terms. He said, from a spiritual perspective, he said, this work has fulfilled its mission. And someone said at one time, if you touch one person with what you say, that really represents hundreds of people. People who have come back from their near-death experience have said that they saw exactly what I just mentioned, that in what's called the life review, they became every person they ever interacted with. They became, and they felt from their standpoint, how they affected the lives of other people. Now, I know that sounds a little bit daunting, because when I say that, normally the conscious, critical mind goes, oh, God, I don't want to see that again. We always think back, right? Something. But the people who've come back said it's an expansive view, and it's not good or bad. It's where there's no need of a judge or jury when you're seeing through the eyes of the person that you affected. You know exactly the impact that you had on them. And so I remember a reading where Cayce said, the good that is being attempted by this work, like by just the desire to help other people, whether it's through working with healing, whether it's through giving readings, whether it's just being kind. He said the good intent, it's the intention. And this goes back to the Bible where it says, man looks upon the outward appearance while God looks on the heart. And Cayce said the good that is being intended or is just being attempted by this work, he said, is going out and is being builded into the lives of souls not yet born. Yeah, isn't that something? So I said this before, I've done a lot of programs around the country based on my book, The Place We Call Home, which explores the afterlife and the near-death experience and whatnot. And this woman stood up and said, what can I do to guarantee that I move to the highest realm possible after this life? I thought, you think I can answer that question? It's funny how things come to you sometimes. And all at once, the words came to me, what she could do, what we could all do to move to the highest light-filled realm possible after this life is over. And she's looking at me really expectantly, like, this better be good, kid. And I said, mean well. And she goes, I'm sorry? I said, mean well. Move from the heart. So when you move from the heart, you can't go wrong. If the center from which you move is love, I said, that's everything. People have come back from these death experiences and have said the things I thought were important were nothing. The small acts of kindness were everything. These were the things that literally kept our world intact. And she said, again, so what do I do to... And I said, it's the motivative spirit behind what you do. I said, if that's centered in love, I said, you will gravitate to the highest level of love that you can imagine. And again, it's like in this world, it's like we either pass or we fail. We succeed or we don't. It's all very end result oriented. Well, the journey of the soul through time and space, Cayce said in his readings that this goes back time-wise, the way that we count time, that we've been doing this for 10.5 million years. Ever wonder why you feel a little bit tired? But the amazing thing is the story that Cayce told, that of this evolving consciousness, that we're constantly growing closer in awareness, where our minds are in harmony consciously with the Creator. That's really what we're all about. And so when I think about it, it's like Cayce was very clear, the destination is a given. We're all on the road home. The magical part is the journey. And when I say magical, how many of you have noticed an increase in coincidences and synchronistic events in your life? How many of you again? Yeah. It's like if we expect those things, if you expect to meet the right person at the right time, not necessarily for material ends, but just for spiritual fulfillment, and you write those things down, it's like when you write something down, that a goal or an ideal, something that will help you awaken, whatever you write down puts intent into activity. I don't know how it works, but they were absolutely right on the mark when they talked about this in The Secret. Now, in The Secret, they were talking about it in materialistic terms, but in terms of spiritual growth and opportunity, if you just write down on a piece of paper, direct me to the next step, or what I'm supposed to do next, and if you expect that answer to come, it will come. Sometimes through a dream, sometimes through meditation. More often than not, it will come from a stranger who's not a stranger, but someone you don't know. Or it will come as a message through someone who will say, oh, by the way, like for me, if I'm looking for a book, I collect rare and first edition books, and if I'm searching for one, I expect somewhere along the line that I'm going to run into it. I just know that for a fact. And so when I'm traveling, I'll always go to some used bookstore and walk in, and usually when I look on the shelf, there's the book that I'm looking for. And it's like, so expectancy and desire, and intent, all of those things create the world that we have. And I remember Cayce talking about this law of attraction, saying, he who expects little will not be disappointed. And Hugh Lynn Cayce, Edgar Cayce's eldest son, I had the privilege of coming to see him during the last year of his life. He was kind of a mentor to me. And he would say at his conferences, he'd say, if you feel out of the presence of God, make no mistake about who moved. The only thing that stands in the way is ourselves and our self-doubt. And we all have that inner critic. We are harder on ourselves than God would ever dream of being. And in the divine scheme of things, I remember reading in this book, this Lama was talking and said, if humankind didn't go down what is so-called the wrong path, or didn't learn things the wrong way, how would they ever find the right way? Or how would they ever find the lighted way? So even the paths through darkness and hardship and whatnot, usually, always, at least in my life, lead to an open door. And it's kind of like there's always this net underneath you, whether you're aware of it or not. Edgar Cayce was very clear that we do not enter this realm alone, but there's a blueprint, there's a divine design to it. We're not robots. We have free will. But all along the way, Cayce said, we have those companions, those guides that are there to prompt us. And they prompt us through the intuition. And they usually speak very softly and very, in very short sentences, usually something like, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Any of you ever had that experience? Where you're getting ready to do something and you hear that, I wouldn't do that, and you do it anyway? Oh, how many of you know what I'm talking about? And after all hell breaks loose, you go, you know, something told me I shouldn't have done that, right? And it's like, for a lot of people in the mainstream, they might question for a moment what that something is, but that's the divine speaking to us. You know, in that small voice that comes through that just says, that's not a good idea. You know, you should not, you know, and in my life, I've just sort of followed that prompt all along the way. I came from a very down-to-earth, blue-collar family from rural Indiana. Two older brothers who were very good at mechanics and construction, and to say that I was not good at those things is the understatement of the year. Put a hammer in my hands and there will be blood. Put a wrench in my hand and bolts will be snapped off an engine faster than lightning. I don't know what it is. So my dad, who was a machinist, you know, didn't quite get what his third son was all about. I didn't get what I was all about. But when I found the Cayce material, you know, and was planning to move down here to be part of the readings project to computerize the readings, my dad was like, you're moving to Virginia for a job you don't have yet? I'm like, yeah. And he said, but you were a broadcast journalist in the Navy. You're all set to go to college to major in broadcasting. I said, I hate broadcasting. You know, and it wasn't so much I hated broadcasting, it's kind of a vicious business to say the least. And I couldn't answer his question as to why. I just felt that prompt that said, go here, do this. And so for years, my dad would say, when are you going to get a real job? You know, when are you going to do this? Da 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 da. Now it's my son, the author, so all that's over now. So I've learned that sometimes following that inner prompt is difficult at times, because some of the closest people to you are going to call you crazy. They will. I mean, it's just par for the course. But if you follow it, it leads to doors, magical doors that open up in miraculous ways. But you have to take that risk and go through the door. I was just sharing my own personal experience, because everything that opened up for me, it was like it wasn't really planned from my conscious mind's perspective. I just followed the prompts. And Cayce said the divine speaks to us directly, you know, through the intuition, through the imagination, through dreams, through meditation. And now more than ever, I think that if there was a veil or between the seen and the unseen worlds that we've always been connected with, it seems to be dissolving. It seems to be, because more and more people that I meet are having visionary experiences. And you just look at how science and spirituality, once were arch enemies, are now coming together, you know, in the most amazing, amazing ways. And when I looked at Cayce's readings on the evolution of the soul, I found some amazing things. Because keep in mind, Edgar Cayce, while in a trance state, was able to answer any question posed to him. You know, not just on medical issues, but on any question. And so when he went back to talk about the creation of human beings, you know, some of those readings are really in depth. But just in brief, one of the stories that he told was that that before we came into materiality, you know, that he talked about us as being thoughts in the mind of God, that all of us were as thoughts in the mind of God, and were at some time before time projected outward, you know, what scientists call the Big Bang theory. Well, he talked about the earth as a place that wasn't necessarily initially intended for souls to inhabit, but souls having free will saw it and wanted to experience a sensual experience. When I say sensual, I mean touching, feeling, you know, they were drawn into the earthly realm. Well, it's not that this wasn't in the divine plan of things, but Cayce said the earth wasn't originally intended for us to inhabit. But once we got in here, we really got in here. And he said the problem arose when, we as souls were projecting ourselves into three-dimensional animal-like figures. And this is where in mythology we get the Cyclops, the mermaid, all of the things in mythology really, according to Cayce, were a part of history. Well, a problem arose because once the soul got in, it got stuck. It became a part of the evolution of this material world. And so Cayce said that the divine needed a plan to help souls go through the entire evolutionary process of the earth, but yet at the same time to be aware of the divine. And so he talked about the Adamic race, meaning Adam. And he talked about the souls were creating a prototype of this body that we now inhabit, a body that was physical, that we could experience the three-dimensional world, and at the same time was built in with this inner circuitry so we could connect with the divine. And this is the 7 chakras that we have within, or the 7 centers. And so while all this is going on, Cayce said there was a group of souls that were pushing the primates or the apes so that they would be more intelligent, so they could move into them. So these were 2 separate things going on at the same time. Well, once this body was perfected and projected into, bless you, into three-dimensional, once this body was made and projected into the earth, I don't exactly know how this worked, but Cayce said that the beings we know as Adam and Eve, he said this was actually the Adamic race and consisted of 144,000 souls. He said, and there was a 5-point projection in the 5 continents, in the 5 races, simultaneously. And this kind of answered the question where we go along in Genesis and suddenly Cain's wife shows up. And like going, was it Cain's wife? Somebody's wife shows up and everybody's like, where'd she come from? Well, Cayce said there were 144,000 other souls that were following likewise. Well, those that were influencing the primates or the apes moved away from that and followed suit with the Adamic race so that they could incarnate into the earth. And Cayce said death was introduced as a blessing, not as something to be afraid of. Death enabled souls to come into the earth, experience the material world, and then move out at the end of the lifetime. Up to that point, souls were trapped in these monstrous-type bodies for hundreds of thousands of years as we count time, or thousands of years. I'm condensing this story immensely. There's a book, I don't know if it's still in print, called Edgar Cayce's Story of the Origin and Destiny of Man by Lytle Robinson, I believe. But the Story of Jesus, thank you, yes. Edgar Cayce's Story of Jesus by Jeffrey First has the story. So in the evolutionary story of the missing link, there's a very good reason why there is a missing link, because there's no link at all. These were 2 separate creations, according to Cayce. And even though the apes have some intelligence that are like human beings, this body that we have was a divine creation, and in the beginning. And so the whole idea was that we as souls who had come into the earth could come into this finite realm and bring with us infinite powers or possibilities. And so we have stories of Atlantis, the so-called mythical continent, where we had unlimited powers that kind of led to our own undoing. And yet, we could look back at that and say, well, the whole continent ended up exploding. And that's entirely possible. I mean, there's evidence that they're finding Atlantis truly existed. And yet, at the same time, here we are, right here, 2008, we're fine. And so I always tell people at programs and whatnot that whatever our experiences have been, in the worst case scenario, what could possibly happen to us? What's the worst possible thing that could happen to you? You could die. Well, you can't. So, removing that from the equation, what's the worst thing that could happen? And so I have this image of, you know, many of us were raised with this idea that you get one shot at this planet, and as a result of what you learn, you know, if you don't love and forgive, you go to hell, you do not pass go, you do not collect $200, you know, end of the road. And even as a child, I thought, you know, if that's true, there's a lot of people that are getting the short end of the stick here. There are people that are born blind or that are born in less than desirable conditions. And so when I came across the concept of reincarnation, I thought, well, of course. You know, it makes sense. When I looked around, everything in the earth came back. And I thought, what if we came into this experience, into this life, into this world to experience all things? And having experienced all things, you know, then in the realms of spirit, become co-creators with God. And this is what Lynn Sparrow was talking about, wasn't she? That we're all on the road home. And so, in my view, we can now do away with the judge and jury that we've been taught is going to be waiting for us after death. You know, because again, if it's true that at the end of this life that we will see things through the eyes of people we've affected, there's no better judge than ourselves, we who have lived the life. And in that light, this is where I sort of part the ways with the fundamentalist teachings. According to the readings and according to many sources, God is love. Love is God. We are children of that one source and are indestructible. Basic physics tell us that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. And so we can't be done away with or separated or cut off from the Creator. In the words of Dr. George Ritchie, who wrote Return from Tomorrow, profound near-death experience, he said, looking at my life when I had this death experience, he was dead for at least 10 minutes, he said that in the presence of this great being of light that was with me, that was reviewing my life with me, he said, it loved every unlovable thing about me. It loved everything. That no matter what I did or didn't do, the love was a given. It was a fact. It was a given. And so throughout the ages, there have been great teachers that have come among us to remind us of that. Because the ego, or the part of ourselves, I call it the inner critic, is so hard on us, you know. And really what it really comes down to is that we are loved beyond anything we can possibly imagine. So it really comes down to the journey through this realm, through time and space. And I've said this before, but you know, Hugh Lynn used to tell me, imagine what you want to see when you leave this world behind. You know, he said, because thoughts are things. You know, this is one of the essential things that scientists felt like they discovered in What the Bleep Do We Know? It's like, we discovered that thoughts create reality. And I'm going, yeah, Cayce said that in 1932, you know? That he said it's not a morbid preoccupation to envision what you would like to see after this life is over. Envision it. What would you like to see? For me, you know, I see walking through this like enchanted forest down this path, and there's a guy who kind of looks like Jesus, sitting on a rock. There's a boombox playing Nirvana, and I sit on the rock opposite him, and he says, "Tell me about the journey. What was it like? Tell me everything, everything." And I could see my whole life, you know, portrayed in this panoramic view, and I realized it was all about learning to love. Not that I got it all right, because we're all works in progress, and there's no greater work in progress than the one that's standing before you now. But I can see at some future time or another when I do get it right, or and again, from my own perspective, like I'm the one who's living this life, so I'm the one who's determining how well I do or don't do. But I'm looking forward to the time where I see my life and everything in it, and I'm completely happy with it, and I'm escorted through this path to a stage, and I hear my name announced, and I walk up to the platform, and they hand me a gold statue, and I get to say the words I've always wanted to say. I'd like to thank the Academy and my director, God, who I didn't see much but was always there, and my family and my great producer. Thank you all so much. That's the way I think I'd like to see this life. And because I want to see that, that's the way I would like to, that's the way it's going to be. Why? Because I believe that's the way it's going to be. And so we take ourselves, I think, entirely too seriously. I was watching an interview with Anthony Hopkins, and he, in this interview, said, I think all this is a dream. Said this on primetime, he said, I think the whole thing is a dream. And so he wrote this movie called Slipstream. How many of you have heard? Anthony Hopkins. Sir Anthony Hopkins, most notable as Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. He's an incredibly funny person. But he was talking about how he thought that this entire life was really a movie. And I found that that perspective is very helpful when you look at life and what's going on, around you. Because over here you can see there's a drama, and there's a comedy, there's horror, and here's tragicomedy. And when Edgar Cayce said, stand aside and watch self pass by. Stand aside and watch self pass by. And I couldn't quite grasp what is he really saying here. And I thought, he's saying, see yourself as a character in a film and those around you. Because it's so easy to get caught up in what's going on in the world. And Cayce always reminded people, do not judge things by the outward appearance of things. Things are not as they seem. He said, everyone is meeting themselves. And so he said, so meet everyone that you meet with compassion, with understanding, because you're looking at a part of yourself. If what all of these teachings have been saying, that it's all from one source, one force, even our worst enemy is ourselves. And I remember I was telling this conference, and this woman said, I don't have a problem praying for the so-called enemy on the other side of the world. Sometimes I have problems with the other person sitting on the opposite side of the dining room table. And I said, right, exactly. I said, sometimes the greatest challenges are the people we love the most, And but recognizing that what Cayce said, that we can only see in others that which we have in ourselves. We can only see that which we have in ourselves. Otherwise, how could we recognize it? So in that view, there is an evolution of consciousness going on that is ongoing. Scientists say that the universe is expanding. And there's also this other idea that as we learn things, God learns. The creative forces, or the one force, that as we journey through this realm and learn things, then everybody else does too. And that's what George Ritchie said when he saw in his near-death experience, everything that he did when he moved from the heart not only helped someone else, but he said it was like a ripple effect, throwing a rock into a pond. He said it continued on and on and on and on. Not only that, he said that he saw his intentions more clearly than he saw his deeds. That the intention was a thing. It was a force for good. So it's the try that seems to count. Just the trying. And so, questions at this point? If you don't, I'll sing. You don't want that. Yes? How does karma fit into all this? Um, Karma is memory. Karma is memory. It's what we might call the eternal, it's been called the law of cause and effect, and we have a tendency to think of karma in terms of negativity. And yet, you know, I saw this little girl named Emily Bear that was on a show. She's 4 years old and she composes music. You can go on the internet and look up Emily Bear. She's 4 years old and she looks like an angel. And so karma is really that everything that we have created returns to us. The artistic ability, the love that we have, that we share with others, will always return to those that we love, and will always return to those that we have stuff to work out with. So karma is a benevolent law, you know, and a lot of people can. What's that? It doesn't always seem that way. You're right, but it's all about perspective, you know, and this is where perspective on things, like if we go through life and think, oh, I got to pay off my karmic credit card at 32.9%, I've got to make up for, oh God, what did I do to deserve this, you know, and we can go through life like that. Or the other perspective is, wow, I'm here with the opportunity to bring God more fully into 3 dimensions. That's my mission, to bring love more fully into this earth. And every person I meet, if I meet them with love, enemy or friend, from that space, it dissolves the so-called bad karma. Because I've often thought that, you know, we don't really have any control over what happens to us, but we do have a choice in how we react to what happens to us. So our reaction to things has a great deal to do with so-called karma, you know. And there's a lot of times we will speak automatically, you know, or defensively or whatnot. And if we just pause for a moment, I remember in a reading that says whenever there's a small disagreement that blows up into something huge, I know you all know what I'm talking about, like something minor will turn into World War III, where you'll pause and go, God, good thing I didn't kill anybody, you know. Cayce said there is something to be met when there's that kind of reaction, karmically speaking. But so the reaping of, I'd like to do away with the terms good and bad karma, because it's all an experience for growth. I mean, even at this Easter season, when I was writing the Magdalene Diaries, I was the whole story in this novel about Mary Magdalene and the crucifixion. I had been immersed in Cayce's story of Jesus for many, many years, but when I wrote this novel, the thing that really captured my attention was, Cayce said, no one saw the crucifixion coming, because Jesus had spoken in parables for so long. You know, he'd always, you know, talk in parables. And so when he said, you know, I'm going to be arrested, they're going to kill me, but not to worry, you know, he didn't speak of the resurrection per se. He just said, tear this temple down and I will rebuild it in 3 days. But when we read the Bible, he's saying it clearly what's going to happen, but nobody, according to the readings, nobody saw it coming, and they thought everything was absolutely lost, you know, except his mother. The reading said Mary knew, she didn't know what was going to happen. And so in the Magdalene Diaries, it's kind of humorous in a dark way. Jesus is on the cross, and the other guy is on his left, you know, and it's been a very long day, and the guy on his left says, you know, if you're who they say you are, why don't you come down from the cross? I could see Jesus going, man, that'd ruin the finale. It's like, what are you talking about? He says, well, you may find this hard to believe, but I'm going to come back from the dead. And I can see the guy going, lunatic. There's a lunatic on my left. And he did. And Cayce said the whole thing, what looked like mankind's darkest hour, when hope seemed absolutely gone, that this man, who had been a culmination of all the great teachers throughout time who had been silenced because of speaking the truth, that it was embodied in this man, the first one, not the only one, but the first one to overcome death. And Cayce said it was because he was able to look his persecutor in the eye and forgive them. And when he said, "Forgive them, they know not what they do," he wasn't saying that as a martyr. He was saying, if they truly knew what they were doing, if they knew who I was, they wouldn't do it. They were like, he saw them as like unruly school kids. And Gandhi had the same mindset, you know? And so it seems to be that people do the most harmful, hurtful things out of ignorance and fear. And the way it came out in the Magdalene Diaries was, the ones who sit in darkness or move from darkness and fear, they don't know that the light is not their enemy. They don't know. All they think is, it'll burn me. It's too bright. It hurts. Put it out. And you use that equation to all the great people who have been silenced. You know, the great teachers, the great leaders who were persecuted. It was out of fear and ignorance. But on this Easter season, it is so wonderful to remember the story of Jesus, because that is evidence of that. What God has ordained, not even death can silence. There is nothing that can stand in our way. There's nothing that can get in our way unless we buy into the hatred, unless we seek vengeance upon those who hurt us. You know, it's the ultimate trick. We don't realize that when we hold a grudge or seek vengeance on somebody else, that we've signed our contract in blood as one of them. You know, and so a lot of it is that breaks the chain. The only thing that's going to bring about really, I think, peace in our time is following that precept of, if they knew the harm they were doing, they wouldn't do it. Because ultimately, they're doing it to themselves. And in that light, yes, they will have to meet it, you know, karmically. So when you see someone that looks like they're getting away with something in this realm, or they get off scot-free, there is no getting away with something, because there's this eternal law of balance, that what you put out, you must meet. And when we can have compassion for, you know, someone who has committed horrible crimes, that they're going to have to feel and see this through the eyes of the people they hurt, that's no small task. You know, it really isn't. And so in that light, this is why the readings call it the work. As he said, it's easy to love your friends. You know, it's easy to love people who love you. The work comes in when you're face to face with someone who would despitefully use you or manipulate you or whatnot. Now, this doesn't mean being a doormat, you know, and lying down. There's a point where you do stand up and you do, you know, set your boundaries. Just don't take their head off, you know. There's a question over here. No? Yes.
In relationship to what you were talking about with the 140,000 souls
Mm-hmm.
and the variations and the multiplicity there, I've been doing an awful lot of reading into the book of Enoch.
Oh, yes.
Where would they fit in there somehow into this grouping you're referring to?
His question is about the 144,000 that I referred to earlier, about the 144,000 souls. Edgar Cayce said that in the evolution, everything, like 144,000 are also referred to in the book of Revelation. It talks about the 144,000 souls. He said this is emblematical, that everything on the outside is a symbol within. And if I don't remember what reading it's in, but I remember him saying that within the body, each of us, we have 144,000 perfected cells in the body. And that when we meditate, it's like there is a time and a place where those 144,000 cells will multiply and create what he called the glorified body. And so, whereas there are some groups that think that it's 144,000 people that will be saved, actually what it is those 144,000 cells or atoms within the body will multiply and create the light body. I believe that's my understanding of it. Even in the book of Revelation, it talks about the 24 elders, like the 24 elders that sit. He said there are 24 cranial nerves in the brain that become activated through meditation and prayer that also add to this awakening process. So everything that we read about in the Bible happened, but those experiences have been internalized and have become literally a part of our being. So it's very, very interesting. Cayce gave 24 readings giving an interpretation of the book of Revelation. And he said, this is the story of the soul's journey through time and space, eons and eons of time. They're not easy to understand, but he said all of the emblems, the dragons, the beasts, the churches, the angels, all of these in the book of Revelation are forces within us. Things that we have to battle with, things that we have to overcome. He said these are not forces on the outside, but they're forces within. And even when we think about the term Armageddon, or the end of the world, well, the world has ended many times. If we look at the world as being the collective consciousness of how we perceive our world, that's the world, the consciousness. It didn't say anything about the end of the earth. But the world, I saw a reading that talked about, again, there may come the Armageddon. And what that means is a shift or a change in consciousness or this awakening. And Eckhart Tolle speaks very, very clearly about this in his book, A New Earth. Any of you reading A New Earth right now? Fabulous, isn't it? If you've not gotten the book, I can't recommend it highly enough. I know little about Eckhart Tolle, but I can tell you this book, to me, is like a companion book of The Vision by Ken Carey. She's got it in her hand. It takes you to the next step. I don't know how he wrote it, but the way he writes it, you can feel a shift or a broadening or expanse of your awareness as you read it. And to me, I think the reason that there are more people on Earth right now is it's kind of like the Super Bowl of some sort. Not that there's going to be some great clash or whatnot, but it seems that there is going to be a great event that I perceive is going to be an inward experience that's going to be a transformative consciousness for the masses that will start with a handful of people and then spread outward in sort of a critical mass. What do they call that concept, the 12th monkey? 100th monkey. Any of you not familiar with that concept? They observed the species of monkeys on this island, and they taught one of the monkeys to wash off fruit before he ate it. And on the other side of the island, this monkey just spontaneously did the same thing. It was like this was evidence that there's a collective consciousness that what one person learns at the subconscious level, it carries on. So whatever enlightenment we gain adds to the whole, in that we're all interconnected. And I find that just magical. Yes? Mm-hmm.
I'm actually at the present moment experiencing this. How do you be love and light that's not how do you forgive, but how do you do it without feeling guilty? I just ended a relationship, and my guides told me that it needed to be, it was just negative, and I needed to move on, and I needed to put up boundaries to not let this person guilt me back into the games and such. So how do you find, in interpersonal relationships, I have no problem working on the love and forgiveness and light, but I tend to feel guilty, and then because I see the reflection back and forth and things. See what I'm saying?
What she just asked was, in a relationship, how do we move through this experience and not feel guilty? I remember Irma Bombeck saying, "Guilt, the gift that keeps on giving." Guilt is that's a dark force. It really is. And, you know, Cayce always talked about, he said, follow what your conscience tells you to do. And it sounds like you were prompted to do whatever it was that you had to do. When you follow that, then, you know, there's something inside you that usually awakens or whatnot. And now, I don't know all of the deeper implications, but again, what I said earlier about us being harder on ourselves than God would ever dream of being, keep in mind or remember what George Ritchie said, that God loved every unlovable thing about you. And so in that light, why are you feeling guilty?
Because I don't want to hurt. I feel, it sounds ego, but I know that he's responsible for his life and his own feelings, but it's, and he happens to live in the same building I live in right now. So
Oh, I see.
will run into
She's
him, and I've been guided to just not give into the energy and to even
you know, and
indulge in even saying hello, how are you? And I've had people go, well, you can say hi, but at this point, that will open up, because I know what kind of person he is, it'll open up, oh, well, let's talk, and then it'll open up the whole thing again, and then it'll get back in the same pattern.
and she's talking about setting boundaries, and you know, and anytime you're ending a relationship, I mean, it's never easy. I mean, it's never easy, and it's usually there's a lot of emotional stuff. What you can do to protect yourself, and it sounds cliche, but to see yourself wrapped in, you know, a white blanket or something. Yeah, I was going to say white light, but a lot of times people, I would say a white blanket because that's so easy to envision or imagine. And especially those who are sensitive, like you are, we tend to pick up the emotions from other people very, very easily. And using this, whatever method that you choose to do, you know, seeing like yourself in a circle, like a spotlight or something, doing things like that and just asking, you know, that you be at peace. There's an affirmation that I use, especially if I'm about to face a difficult situation. Very simple, but it's like, I am at peace in the center of God now. It sounds very simple, but I am at peace in the center of God now. And for me, it helps bring me back to center. And this was in What the Bleep Do We Know? It talks about with focused intent. You know, if you reword this experience that you're having and saying, you know, that you love him, you bless him, I set you free with love. I am no longer attached to anything but unconditional love. And create your own mantra or whatnot, but just in my own life, in my own situations, that will help protect you because no one can truly make us feel guilty. No one can make us feel guilty. It's like, it's we ourselves, you know, that, I mean, people can try, you know, they'll say things that like push buttons. I remember not, well, I'll just say a relative who was masterful at, you know, pushing the guilt buttons. And I used to say, I heard the tape. I've heard it before. 10 years of psychotherapy and $100,000 later, I don't have time for the guilt, you know. And sometimes it helps to bring it to their attention. Like if someone's trying to make you feel guilty, you can turn it into a joke and say, is this the part where I'm supposed to feel guilty? Or did I miss that? Was that it? And watch the reaction. They're like, huh, I wasn't trying to make you feel guilty. And in a playful way, you're turning the spotlight back on them and smiling at them. And they usually back down pretty quickly, too. You know, if you say it in a loving, playful way. Does that make sense? Yeah. So.
I just wanted to say, you know, Oprah's doing the Eckhart Tolle book as a free course online.
Yes.
It's really a massive contribution.
Oprah Winfrey is doing Eckhart Tolle's book, A New Earth, as an online course every.
It already has a few million people signed up.
Yes, I know. I was in the last two classes. It's online at oprah.com and it's free. If you can get in, sometimes my computer gets overloaded like the rest of me. Alan?
It's on XM satellite radio
It's on XM satellite radio at the same time. And for those of you, it's really what I thought was so wonderful. And this was kind of like a cue about that there is something really big going on. When I see Oprah, you know, being powerfully moved by this book, and, you know, at the end of her show, you know, she talks about this class in this book that just people reading it, it's awakening them, and it's transforming people's lives, not as a phenomenon, but awakening them to the real person that they are. And she says, join us for the awakening. And I heard that, and I was like, boy, things are moving, you know, and they really are. And it's not that, and this author is a very grounded, very humble man. I forgot the name of his other book, but this book, The Power of Now, this really represents the next step that Cayce talked about. Like when they said, what are the deeper implications of the Aquarian age? He said that we would evolve to the place where we would be conscious of ourselves and conscious of the infinite at the same time. And I think this is a part of that process. Not necessarily just this course, but whatever course you take to help you become awakened to the truly magnificent being that you are. And we are. You know, it's the inner critical voice that's so hard on us. That's the myth. That's the illusion. You know, in the book The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz, it talks about the judge and the victim, two prominent voices in our heads. You know, the judge is always, you know, blasting you for something, and the victim is always, why did this happen to me? And he talks about those two voices as being aspects of ourselves, and he has tools in that book to help you on your journey toward a greater awakening. Someone gave me the Four Agreements, and then they gave me A New Earth, and I was like, it was like one led right to the other. Absolutely amazing. And these are things that if you choose to work with them, it's an ongoing process, kind of like the caterpillar moving to become the butterfly is a beautiful analogy. And someone told me that years ago that the butterfly was the symbol that was the original symbol of Christianity because it represented the resurrection. And I like that. I've often wondered why churches didn't have pictures of the ascension, you know, because that really is, I think, en masse what we're looking at, an ascension in consciousness. And I think that that's the deeper meaning of the resurrection and the ascension, that Jesus didn't have this experience to say, look at me, you know, I'm king of the world, you know, but that he was saying, I am a picture of your future. I am what you will become. And Cayce said that he was the pattern of perfection for all of us, you know, showing us that in the evolution of time and space that eventually, yes, we will become, and that's the next part that I'll be talking about, becoming infinite in a finite world. And it's really just talking about the miracles of Jesus were really, Cayce said, what you call the miraculous is really science not yet discovered. So on that note, why don't we take a break and we'll come back around. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.